The Ford was old enough to have rust on the running boards and a heater that took 10 minutes to get going, but it ran, and that was enough. Cole Reeves had learned a long time ago not to ask more from things than what they could give. He came down off the interstate just before 6 in the morning when the sky was the color of a bruise healing that particular shade of gray-purple that happens in the last few minutes before the sun decides to show up. The road narrowed from 4 lanes to two, then from two to something that felt more like a suggestion, and the trees came up close on both sides. Tall pines that had been standing since before anyone currently alive had anything to say about it. The kind of trees that made you feel, if you were paying attention, that the road was something the forest was tolerating rather than something anyone had a right to expect. Sadie was asleep in the passenger seat. She had her cheek pressed against the window and her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin and her small mouth open just slightly. She was 8 years old, and she slept the way children sleep when they trust completely, which is to say she slept like it was the easiest thing in the world. Cole watched her for a second at a red light, the only red light as it turned out that Cedar Falls, Arkansas had to offer. Then he looked back at the road. One stoplight, one main street, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a hardware store with a display of seed packets in the window, a barber shop with a pole out front that still turned, a gas station on the corner with two pumps and an American flag that had seen better decades, a feed store, a bar with a neon sign that hadn't been turned on yet because it was 6 in the morning, and even bars in small Arkansas towns had some standards left. Cedar Falls. Population 400, according to the green sign on the county road, though Cole suspected that number was optimistic and had not been updated since sometime in the previous century. He had bought the cabin on the ridge 3 weeks ago through a property management company whose name he had already forgotten. Negotiated entirely by email with a man he had never spoken to, sight unseen, paid cash. He had not come to look at the place first because there was nothing about it that needed looking at. It had 4 walls. It had a roof. It was 45 minutes from the nearest city of any size and another 20 from that to anything with an airport. That was the whole point. He pulled into the gravel lot beside the diner because the sign in the window said open at 5 and the clock on his dashboard said 6:02. And Sadie was going to be hungry when she woke up, and he had not eaten since somewhere outside Memphis. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticks of metal cooling. Then he looked at his daughter one more time. She was still asleep. The rabbit was still under her chin. He got out of the truck quietly and went around to her side and opened the door slowly, and she stirred but did not wake. And he reached in and lifted her, all 47 pounds of her, and she made a small sound against his shoulder and grabbed his jacket with one fist, the way she had done since she was 2 years old, when she had first figured out that grabbing on meant staying close. He carried her inside. The bell above the door was one of those old brass ones on a spring coil, and it gave a cheerful little jingle that felt slightly absurd in the early morning quiet, like a man laughing at his own funeral. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease, and that particular combination of industrial cleaner and maple syrup that is unique to diners that have been operating for decades in small towns without ever once changing the menu. There were 6 tables and a counter with 8 stools and a pass-through window to the kitchen and a chalkboard on the wall that listed the day's specials in handwriting, so practiced it looked almost like a font. A woman in her early 50s came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dishcloth. She had the look of someone who had been awake since 4 and had made peace with that fact years ago. Her name tag said Loretta. She saw Cole carrying Sadie, and her face did the thing faces do when they see something unexpectedly gentle. She smiled and kept her voice low. Booth by the window, Cole nodded. That'd be good. Thank you. He slid Sadie into the corner of the booth, and she curled against the wall with her rabbit and kept sleeping. He sat across from her. Loretta brought coffee without being asked, set it down without a word, and moved away quietly, which he appreciated more than he would have been able to explain. He sat there for a minute just looking at the diner. I did it the way he had always done it, the way that had become so second nature over 14 years that he no longer had to think about it. It was not paranoia. It was not anxiety. It was simply the habit of a man who had spent a significant portion of his adult life in places where not paying attention had consequences that could not be undone. Three exits: front door kitchen, door visible through the pass-through, and an emergency exit at the back past the restrooms with a push bar and a hand-lettered sign that said alarm will sound and probably would not. Six tables, four occupied, eight stools, two occupied. The woman behind the counter, Loretta. A cook visible through the pass-through window, older, moving slowly with the efficiency of someone who had made the same breakfast 10,000 times. A man at the far end of the counter nursing coffee and staring at nothing. The particular thousand-yard stare of a man who had been up too long or had not slept enough, or both. A young couple in the corner booth sharing a plate of eggs and not talking, which meant they were either very comfortable or very finished with each other. And then there was the man behind the counter. I was somewhere around 65, Cole guessed, with gray hair cut short on the sides and a face that had been lived in fully every line earned. He moved with a slight economy that was not quite a limp, but was not quite normal either, the kind of careful movement that comes from pain that has been managed for so long it has become invisible to the person managing it. He wore a white apron over a blue chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was wiping down the coffee machine with his back to the room. Cole watched him for maybe 30 seconds. Then he understood. It was the angle of the right shoulder, the way the man's weight favored his left side without any apparent reason related to the coffee machine. The small, careful way he breathed when he turned a certain direction. Cole had seen enough men try to hide fresh injuries in his life to recognize the specific performance of a person who does not want to be asked about pain. The man turned around. His name tag said Earl. Earl Dunbar, as it turned out, had owned the Sunrise Diner for 43 years. He had never once raised his voice at a customer, never once refused a man a cup of coffee, never once missed a Sunday service at First Baptist Church of Cedar Falls. In those 43 years, a fact that the congregation noted and respected, and which Earl himself considered less a virtue than simply what you did. He had also approximately 90 minutes ago been on his knees behind his own counter with blood running down his chin while a man named Wade Calloway stood over him and explained patiently and without particular malice what the consequences of missing another payment would be. Earl had not told his daughter. He would not tell his daughter. His daughter lived in Fayetteville and had two kids of her own and believed that her father ran a successful small diner in a peaceful small town, and Earl intended to keep it that way for as long as he possibly could. He came over with the coffee pot, refilled Cole's cup. His hand trembled slightly and the coffee caught the edge of the rim. He started to apologize. Cole said no harm done and meant it in the way that sometimes those three words mean considerably more than those three words. Earl stopped. He looked at Cole for a moment. Not the quick professional glance of a man sizing up a customer, but the slower look of a man trying to figure out something he cannot quite name. First time in Cedar Falls, Cole said, "Yes, sir. Passing through, staying, actually. Bought the Hollings place up on the ridge." Earl's eyes shifted. Something moved across his face that was not quite concern and not quite fear, but was in the neighborhood of both. He said, "Son, I'm going to give you some advice, and you don't have to take it." Cole said, "I'm listening." Earl leaned slightly on the counter. He kept his voice low. "You got business in town, do it quick. You got groceries to buy them Monday mornings when it's quiet. You got a pretty little girl there, and she is a pretty little girl. You keep her close. You understand what I'm telling you?" Cole looked at him. "I think I do." "No," Earl said it quietly. "I don't think you do yet, but you will." He turned and walked back to the counter before Cole could say anything else. Cole watched him go. Then he turned back to his coffee. Sadie stirred across the table. She opened her eyes and looked around at the diner with the calm, evaluating gaze of an 8-year-old, determining whether this was a good or a bad place to be. "Daddy." "Yeah, Peanut. They have pancakes. How do you know the sign says pancakes all day?" "That's a persuasive argument. She smiled and looked out the window at the empty main street of Cedar Falls. And Cole looked at Earl Dunbar behind the counter, moving carefully so as not to use his right side more than necessary. And for a moment, the morning felt like something that had not yet decided what it was going to be. What Cole did not know, sitting in that booth with his coffee and his daughter, was that the man who had sold him the cabin had made a phone call at 6:04 that morning, approximately 2 minutes after Cole's red Ford had pulled into the parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. His name was Virgil Pruitt. He was 41 years old, and he worked for a property management company that handled rentals and sales in Madison County and 3 surrounding counties, and he had been on Wade Calloway's payroll in one capacity or another for going on 9 years. He was not a violent man. He was simply a man who had made a series of small compromises over a long period of time until the compromises had accumulated into something that could no longer reasonably be called a series of small compromises. Each one had seemed necessary at the time. Each one had made the next one easier. That was how it always worked, and Virgil Pruitt was not the first man to discover this too late. He told Wade that the new man in the Hollings cabin had arrived. Big, military build maybe, had a little girl with him. Tennessee plates. Wade Calloway was eating oatmeal at his desk in the steel-paneled office above his warehouse on the east edge of town when Virgil called. He listened without saying much. He asked one question, which was whether Virgil had gotten a look at the man's face. Virgil said he had not, but that Loretta had texted him from the diner. Said the man was quiet. Said he carried the girl in himself. Wade scraped the last of the oatmeal from the bowl and set it aside. He said, "Send Harlan and Spears by for a look." Then he hung up and opened his laptop and went back to the news because a man in Cedar Falls with a little girl in Tennessee plates was probably nothing, and Wade Calloway had not kept this town for 15 years by wasting worry on probably nothings. Harlan Bick was 38 years old and approximately 300 pounds of what happened when a man who had once played defensive tackle for the University of Arkansas had spent the 15 years following his athletic career making poor decisions mostly involving Wade Calloway's organization and the associated lifestyle. He had a jacket with a flaming skull on the back that he had bought at a truck stop in 2019 and wore with a frequency that suggested he believed it said something important about him. Spears Dutton was shorter and leaner and quicker and had the particular kind of dangerousness that comes from not thinking too far ahead. He had a tattoo that started at his collarbone and ended somewhere under his jaw. He was 29 years old and looked older. They came into the diner at 20 past 7. They walked past every empty table and sat down in the booth directly adjacent to Cole and Sadie's. Harlan spread out the way. Large men sometimes spread out in small spaces, his arm draped across the back of the booth so that his hand was approximately 6 inches from Sadie's shoulder. Sadie looked at her father. Cole did not look back at her. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Eyes on me, Peanut." She looked at him. "What do you want to order, Sadie?" I'm not hungry anymore." "Yes, you are. You haven't had your pancakes yet." Behind Cole, Harlan's voice came loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Hey, Spears, you ever seen so many out-of-state plates around here lately? Feel like strangers just keep showing up." Spears said, "Yeah, and nobody tells us they're coming. That's rude, really." Cole kept his eyes on Sadie. "Blueberry syrup, Peanut, yes or no?" "Daddy, that man is eyes on me, baby." "Yes, blueberry syrup. Good girl." Harlan stood up. He leaned over the divider between the booths and put his face close to Cole's ear. "Hey, friend, you all new around here?" Cole did not turn, just stopping through. "Nice truck out there. Old Ford red paint, Tennessee plates. That yours it is. Be a shame if something happened to it." Cole finally turned his head. Not his body, just his head. He looked up at Harlan with a patience that was so complete and so flat that it was almost more unsettling than anger would have been. "Son, I'm having breakfast with my daughter." "I see that. You're in the wrong booth." Harlan laughed. "Am I?" "Yes. And if you like it, you can keep it after I'm gone. Because in about 90 seconds, I'm going to stand up, pay that man at the counter for our meal, and yours walk out that door, and you're going to go back to your own booth and leave the old man alone. That's what's going to happen. He paused. Because if it doesn't, I promise you in front of God and that waitress and my daughter right there, you are going to remember today for the rest of your life. Silence. Harlan blinked. He started to laugh short and sharp and surprised. Then he stopped. Because something in Cole's face had shifted something in the temperature behind the eyes, and Harlan Bick, who had intimidated a meaningful percentage of the adult population of Madison County, Arkansas, over the past decade and a half felt something he was not immediately able to name. He felt the particular sensation of being on the wrong side of a door that he had not realized was closing. Spears said quietly from the other booth, Harlan, let's get some coffee. Yeah, Harlan said. Coffee. He walked back to his own booth. Cole turned back to Sadie. His expression had not changed. Not once. Not from the moment the bell above the door had rung. Blueberry syrup peanut. Final answer, yes, Daddy. Good. Earl brought the pancakes himself. He leaned down as he set the plate in front of Sadie, and when he straightened, he spoke very quietly near Cole's ear. Son, you just did something. Cole looked up at him. I haven't done anything yet. Earl held his gaze for a moment. That's what worries me. Cole looked at the pancakes, at Sadie pouring syrup in a careful spiral the way she always did, at the morning light coming through the window and falling across the table and across his daughter's hair. He picked up his fork. He ate his breakfast. When he was done, he stood, took Sadie's hand, walked to the counter, and paid the check. Then he folded a $100 bill separately and slid it across to Earl. Earl looked at it, then at Cole. What's this for lucky guess? Earl's jaw tightened. Son, I can't take this. Yes, you can. He walked out with Sadie. The bell above the door jingled. At the booth, Spears had his phone out. He was already composing a text. In the steel-paneled office above the warehouse on the east edge of Cedar Falls, Wade Calloway's phone buzzed at 7:52 in the morning. He read the text, read it again, set the phone down, picked it up, called Spears directly. What do you mean he didn't flinch, boss? I mean he did nothing. Just looked at Harlan. Harlan walked back to the booth. Wade was quiet for a moment. Harlan walked away. Yes, sir, Wade said. Where is he now? Gone. Drove out. Red Ford. Said he bought the Hollings cabin. Wade looked at the ceiling. He chewed the inside of his cheek slowly. He said, don't do anything. Not yet. Then he called Virgil. Virgil, that county clerk in Fayetteville still owe you a favor. Yes, sir. I want a name by this afternoon. Red Ford pickup, Tennessee plates. Big guy, military build, bought the Hollings cabin, has a little girl with him. Background check, too. Everything you can get. On it, boss. Wade hung up. He poured himself a drink at 7:55 in the morning, which was something he almost never did. He stood at the window of his office, looking down at the floor of the warehouse below, where four of his men were moving product through the loading dock with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this many times. He was not worried. He had not survived 15 years in this county by being a man who worried easily. However, paying attention in a way that he had not had to pay attention in quite some time. Wade Calloway had grown up 40 miles east of Cedar Falls, in a house with a leaking roof and a father who solved most of his problems with the nearest available piece of lumber. He had left that house at 16 with $40 and the understanding that the world owed him nothing and intended to give him exactly that. What he had built in Cedar Falls over the following 3 decades had not been built through inheritance or luck or the goodwill of institutions that had never shown him any goodwill whatsoever. He had built it through the understanding that in places like Cedar Falls, where the county government was underfunded and the state government was uninterested, and the federal government might as well have been operating on the surface of another planet, somebody was going to fill the vacuum. The only question was who. He had decided at age 22 that the answer was him. He owned the bar. He owned the auto shop. He owned the feed store. He owned the gas station on Route 9. He had a stake in the property management company that Virgil worked for. He had a piece of the only motel in town. Half the employed adults in Cedar Falls worked for one of his businesses in one capacity or another, and the other half were aware enough of the situation to conduct themselves accordingly. Sheriff Dalt Grover had been on his payroll in the informal and entirely deniable sense of the word for the better part of 15 years, which was not something Wade thought about in those terms, but which was simply the way things worked, the way they had always worked, the way things worked in every small town, in every corner of America, where someone with enough patience and enough willingness to operate in the space between what was technically legal and what was technically illegal had decided to make themselves useful. I was not in his own estimation a villain. He was a man who understood how things actually worked. The problem with that particular self-assessment, which Wade had carried for a long time, without ever seriously examining it, was that the people who bore the weight of how things actually worked in Cedar Falls had a somewhat different perspective on the matter. Earl Dunbar, for instance, who had owned the Sunrise Diner for 43 years and who paid Wade a monthly fee that Wade referred to as a community investment contribution, and Earl referred to in the private language of his own skull as the price of not having his windows broken. Margot Winslow, whose husband Walter had owned a bookstore on Main Street until November of 2019, when two of Wade's men had come in after closing to discuss a late payment, and Walter, who was diabetic and 62 years old, and on the floor with a split lip and a sugar crash for 20 minutes before anyone found him, had never come out of the coma. Loretta Vance, who had lost her son Danny to something that had come off a truck that Wade had personally arranged in the fall of 2022, and who had stood behind the counter of the Sunrise Diner every morning since, and said nothing because she had learned, as so many people in Cedar Falls had learned, that saying something accomplished nothing and cost everything. These were not the terms in which Wade thought about Cedar Falls, sitting in his office at 7:55 on a Tuesday morning, drinking a glass of whiskey and watching his men move product through the loading dock. He thought about the jobs he provided. He thought about the loans he had made to people who could not get loans from banks. He thought about the roof he had paid to put on the Baptist church in 2015 and the $20,000 he had quietly given to the volunteer fire department the year before. He thought about all of it, and the thinking made him feel in a general and comfortable way that the balance sheet of his life in Cedar Falls came out somewhere in the positive column. This was the elaborate and well-maintained fiction of a man who had never been asked to look at it from the outside. He did not yet know that the man who had just carried a sleeping child into Earl's Diner at 6 in the morning and said, "No harm done," and left $100 for a man's broken spirit was about to ask him to look at it from the outside. He did not yet know anything about Cole Reeves, except that the man had made Harlan Bick walk back to his own booth without raising his voice. That was, however, enough to make him pay attention. Cole drove them up as a mountain road toward the cabin after breakfast. The road was narrow and unpaved for the last mile, switchbacking up through the pines with the valley spreading out below in the morning light. The cabin was old but solid, built by a man named Hollings in the late 80s, with the apparent intention of outlasting everything which it largely had. Wide porch on the south side, wood stove in the main room. 4 rooms total, which was 3 more than they strictly needed. Sadie found a patch of sunlight on the living room floor and decided it was where her rabbit lived now. Cole unpacked. Not the whole truck, just the essentials: clothes, food. The few things Sadie had insisted were non-negotiable, which included the rabbit already deployed, a box of colored pencils, and a coffee maker that was older than some of his former colleagues. He started the wood stove. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and looked out over the ridge and down into the valley where Cedar Falls sat in the morning light, like something out of a calendar photo. The kind of image that implied a peacefulness that may or may not have accurately reflected the reality. He thought about Earl Dunbar, the angle of the shoulder, the careful, managed way of moving that belonged to a man who was in pain and did not intend to show it. I thought about Harlan Bick sitting back down at his booth when Cole had looked at him. He thought about something Sadie had said in the truck on the way up. "Daddy, yeah. Is that man okay? The one with the coffee." Cole had looked at the road for a moment before answering. "I don't know yet, Peanut." He stood at the window until the coffee was done. Then he poured a cup and went out to the porch and sat on the step. He could see the Baptist church steeple. He could see the single stoplight on Main Street doing its patient, solitary work. And out on the east edge of town near the railroad tracks, he could see a long, low warehouse with a corrugated metal roof and what appeared to be a black pickup parked out front. He sat there a while. He was not a man given to reflection in the dramatic sense. He did not moon over the past or agonize over the future in ways that could not be made useful. He simply sat and looked at the warehouse and thought in the practical, systematic way that had been trained into him over 14 years and had never entirely stopped operating, regardless of what he told himself about wanting a quiet life. He was still sitting there when Sadie appeared in the doorway. "Daddy, yeah, Peanut. Are you going to come in a minute?" She went back inside. Cole sat on the porch for another while. He looked at the warehouse. He thought about an old man behind a counter trying not to use one side of his body. He thought about a bell jingling cheerfully as a man in a white apron knelt on his own floor. He went inside and locked the door. I did not make any decisions. He was not ready to make any decisions. He simply noted things the way he had always noted things, the way that had kept him and the men around him alive in places considerably more dangerous than Cedar Falls, Arkansas, which was to say he filed it away and let it sit and did not pretend he could not see what he could see. They drove back down into town that evening because Sadie wanted real food, and Cole had not yet stocked the cabin with anything beyond crackers and peanut butter, and what could reasonably be described as a bare emergency supply of provisions. The Sunrise Diner was closed. He saw the sign in the window, Earl's handwriting, thanking folks promising 6 a.m. But across the square, a neon sign pulsed orange, the Iron Horse Saloon. Family dining had advertised, though the bar stools visible through the window suggested the emphasis varied depending on the hour. Cole parked across the street. He looked at Sadie. "Listen to me. I'm listening. We sit down, we eat, we leave. No dessert tonight. No dessert. If I stand up and we leave, you stand up and you leave. You don't ask why, you don't stop. Understand? Yes, Daddy. Good girl." He carried her across the street. The hostess, a woman in her 50s, with the particular competence of someone who had been doing this job for a long time and had stopped finding it either difficult or glamorous, led them to a booth in the back corner. Cole had asked for the back corner. She had given it to him without question, the way people sometimes give things to men who ask for them in a certain way. Cole had been in the room for 37 seconds. In those 37 seconds, he had counted 3 exits and noted the position of every person present, 27. He had identified the largest man in the room, a bouncer near the front door who weighed about 240 pounds and had the posture of someone who had done the job long enough to be bored by it. He had noted the bartender, mid-40s, slight hitch in the right leg, something in the set of his shoulders that suggested a history with a uniform of some kind, though Cole could not have said which branch from this distance. He had noted the jukebox playing something country, and the smell of the kitchen, and the 2 emergency exits, and the sight lines from every table to the bar. He had also noted, without looking directly at him, the man sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Not because the man was loud, not because the man was doing anything aggressive or unusual or in any way out of the ordinary, for a man sitting alone at a bar at 7 in the evening in a small Arkansas town, but because of the way the man was sitting, the stillness of him, the particular kind of stillness that belongs to men who have learned to be still, because stillness has always preceded action and the habit never fully goes away. The man was watching Cole with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had been waiting. I was 5'10", 180 pounds. He had a face that your mother would have invited to dinner. He was 47 years old, and he wore a jacket that fit well, and he had a glass of whiskey on the bar in front of him that he had not touched since Cole walked in. Cole looked at the menu. He ordered the chicken fried steak. Sadie ordered mac and cheese. They ate. The jukebox cycled through 3 songs. The room moved around them the way rooms move when nobody has done anything yet, which is to say, with the particular pretense of normalcy that settles over a space when everyone in it is aware that something is about to change. And then the man at the bar stood up. He did not hurry. He walked across the Iron Horse the way a man walks through his own living room. He stopped at Cole's booth. He rested one hand on the back of the bench and smiled down at Sadie. Well, hey there, sweetheart. What's your name? Sadie looked at her father. Cole looked up at the man. Can I help you? Name's Wade, the man said. Wade Calloway. I own a few things around here. Thought I'd come welcome the new family. That's considerate of you. Wade smiled. What's your name, friend? Cole. Cole what? Just Cole. Wade laughed. Short, genuine, appreciative. Just Cole. I like that. A man needs a little mystery, I always say. What brings you to Cedar Falls quiet? Quiet. Wade nodded slowly as though this was a profound and satisfying answer. Yes, sir. Well, I can understand that. A man wants quiet, he's come to the right place. Most of the time, sometimes Wade said things get a little loud. Old-timers forget to pay their bills. Strangers forget their manners. A man has to remind folks how things work around here. He smiled. Cole did not look away from him. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. Wade's eyes went back to Sadie. He bent down slightly. You stay close to your daddy, darling, all right? Town's got bears in the woods. I know, Sadie said. Do you now? Daddy told me. Daddy's a smart man. Wade straightened and looked at Cole for a long moment, then tapped the back of the booth with one finger. Enjoy your dinner, just Cole. He turned and walked back to the bar. Halfway there, without turning, without changing the rhythm of his step, without any visible preparation of any kind, Wade Calloway drew back his arm and threw the empty beer bottle over his shoulder. It flew in a lazy arc across the room. It hit the wooden panel of Cole's booth 3 inches from his left ear and shattered. Green glass scattered across the table. A piece landed on Cole's sleeve. Sadie screamed. Every head in the Iron Horse turned. Cole did not move. Not his hands, not his head, not his eyes. He sat with a piece of green glass on his sleeve and his daughter crying across from him, and he looked at Wade Calloway, who had now turned around at the bar and was wearing that same gentle dinner table smile. My apologies, loud enough for the room to hear. Slippery hands. The bouncer by the door laughed. One other man at the bar laughed. Nobody else made a sound. Cole reached across the table and took Sadie's hand. Eyes on me, Peanut. Daddy, there's glass. There's glass on Eyes on Me. She looked at him. Her face was wet. He reached across and wiped her cheek with his thumb. We're going home, he said quietly. Stand up slow. Hold my hand. Don't let go. Okay, Daddy. He stood. He lifted Sadie out of the booth. He turned toward the bar, and then in a room that was completely silent except for the jukebox, he smiled. It was a small smile, genuine almost, the kind a man might give a stranger at church. He walked toward the bar, holding Sadie's hand until he was approximately 4 feet from Wade Calloway. Every man in the room was watching. The jukebox had moved on to something slow. Cole spoke quietly enough that only Wade could hear him. Mr. Calloway, I don't know you. You don't know me. Right now, today, neither one of us owes the other anything. I'm going to walk out that door with my daughter, and I would like very much to keep it that way. Wade's smile widened. But if you come near her again, Cole said, if you throw another bottle, if you send your men, if I see your face on my ridge, I am going to make this town remember your name for the wrong reasons. He waited. Are we clear, Mr. Calloway? Wade sipped his whiskey. We're clear, for tonight. Cole nodded once. He walked out the front door with Sadie. The bell above the door jingled behind them. In the truck heading up the mountain, Sadie pressed her face against the window and said nothing for a long time. Cole drove with both hands on the wheel. The headlights cut a narrow path through the pines, and the mountain came up around them, and below the lights of Cedar Falls grew smaller and eventually disappeared. Daddy. Yeah, was that a bad man? Cole drove for a moment. Yes, honey, that was a bad man. Are you going to make him stop? He reached over and put his hand on top of hers. She turned her palm up and held on. Go to sleep, Sadie. We're almost home. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before they reached the ridge. Cole carried her inside and laid her in her bed and pulled the blanket up and set the rabbit in the crook of her arm. He stood looking at her in the dark for a while. Then he went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and drank it at the sink and set the glass down. He looked at his hands. They were not shaking. That he thought was the problem. A man whose hands shook after something like that was still processing it as an event. A man whose hands did not shake had filed it away as information. He went out to the porch. The mountain air was cold and his breath came in small clouds. Below, the single stoplight of Cedar Falls blinked patient yellow in the dark. He could see the warehouse on the east edge of town with its lights still on. He looked at it for a long time. I thought about Kyle Mitchell, 19 years old, Eastern Afghanistan. The weight of him over 6 hours of mountain and the whole time knowing. He had not thought about Kyle Mitchell in almost 5 years, and now he was thinking about him in connection with an old man behind a diner counter who had tried not to use the right side of his body. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact labeled Only Rourke. He stared at the name. Then he pressed the button. It rang 4 times. A voice answered with gravel in it. Miller Cole almost corrected him, then didn't. Hey, Rourke. Cole, Jesus. What time is it there late? What's wrong? Nothing. You don't call me this hour for nothing. Sadie, okay, she's asleep. You okay? Cole looked at the warehouse lights below. I don't know yet. Rourke was quiet for a moment on the other end. Tell me, Cole told him. Not everything, just the shape of it. Cedar Falls, a man named Wade Calloway, an old man behind a counter moving carefully so as not to use one side of his body. A beer bottle 3 inches from his daughter's face. The smile, the voice, the particular kind of stillness that preceded action. When he was done, Rourke didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said, You called me for permission. No. Yes, you did. You called me because you already decided and you wanted somebody to talk you out of it. Maybe. Well, I'm not going to. I know. Cole. Rourke's voice changed slightly the way it did when he was about to say something he had thought about. You know what I always said about you? Why you were different from the other guys? No. You could have left Kyle on that mountain. Every one of us would have understood. The situation was what it was. But you carried him for 6 hours because you couldn't walk away from a man who needed someone to not walk away from him. That's not training, Cole. That's not what the Navy does to you. That's who you were before you ever put on a uniform. Cole looked at the warehouse. I sat in that booth today, he said, and I held her hand and I told her that as long as I was alive, she was safe. And I meant it. So keep meaning it. Rourke. I saw Earl's face on Kyle's face. I saw Wade Calloway's face on every man who ever put someone on their knees who had no business being there. I know you did. Tell me how to walk away from it. Rourke took a breath. You don't. You know that already. The question is whether you go in clean or you go in angry. Clean. Then plan it like an op. Not because you're angry, not because it's personal, because it's the right thing and it needs to be done right. You go in clean and you come out clean, and when it's over, you go back to that little girl and you start the life you came here for. Cole was quiet. And Cole, yeah, call me when it's over. I don't care what time. All right. Godspeed, brother. Cole held the phone for a moment after the call ended. Then he put it in his pocket. He stood on the porch for a long time, looking down at Cedar Falls, at the warehouse lights, at the single stoplight blinking yellow in the dark, at the steeple of the Baptist church just visible over the tree line. By the time he went back inside and locked the door, the whole week was mapped in his head. The way a room is mapped before you enter it. The way a thing is understood before it is done. He checked on Sadie. She was still sleeping. The rabbit was still in the crook of her arm. I went to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He thought about an old man who had told him he would understand, and about a little girl who had pressed her face against the truck window and gone quiet, and about a beer bottle that had shattered 3 inches from the ear of a man who had not flinched because he had seen worse, because he had been in places where worse was the baseline, and survival was what you did when you refused to be the kind of man who let it stand. He lay down. He did not sleep for a while. But when he did, he slept without dreaming, which was the closest thing to peace he was likely to get. And for now, it was enough. He was up before 5, not because he had slept badly. He had slept the way he always slept before something, which was to say, completely and briefly, and without any of the restless churning that most people associated with a man on the edge of a difficult thing. 14 years had trained that out of him. You slept when you could because you did not know when you would sleep again, and you woke when you needed to because the body properly conditioned understood the difference between rest and delay. Haimad coffee in the dark. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the valley below begin to separate itself from the night, the tree line emerging first, then the rooftops, then the single stoplight at the intersection of Main and Route 9, clicking through its patient cycle for an audience of no one. He thought about what needed to happen today. I thought about it the way he had always thought about complicated things, which was to break them into their component parts and address each part in the order that made tactical sense without sentiment and without shortcuts. Sentiment and shortcuts were what got people killed. Not the big dramatic failures, not the catastrophic errors of judgment that made for good stories afterward. The small ones. The assumption that you already knew what you were walking into. The decision to move before you had seen the ground. I was not going to make that decision. He poured the coffee into a travel cup, wrote a note for Sadie that said, "Back soon, pancake mix is in the cabinet," and left it on the kitchen table next to her colored pencils. Then he took his jacket from the hook by the door and went outside into the cold morning air. The Ford started on the first try. He let it warm up for 2 minutes, then he drove down the mountain. He came through Cedar Falls just after 6 when the town was beginning to stir, but had not yet committed to being awake. Earl's Diner had its lights on. The gas station on Route 9 was open, a single attendant visible through the window of the small office. Everything else was still closed, the storefronts dark, the sidewalks empty. Cole drove east. I went past the railroad crossing and past the junkyard with its towers of compacted metal glinting in the early light, past the water tower with its faded mural of a buck standing in a creek that someone had painted years ago with more ambition than skill, and then he was on the straight flat stretch of Route 9 that ran along the southern edge of town, and there it was. The warehouse sat about 40 yards back from the road behind a chain-link fence that was more suggestion than obstacle. Corrugated metal roof. Concrete block walls painted a gray that had been weathering for at least a decade. A loading dock on the east side with a roll-up door currently closed. A side entrance partially obscured behind a stack of pallets that may or may not have been deliberately positioned that way. 4 vehicles in the lot, a black pickup, a white cargo van with no markings, a tan Tahoe and a red Camaro that belonged to someone who thought highly of himself. Cole drove past at exactly the speed limit. He did not slow down. He looked at the building the way he looked at everything, which was to say he looked at it completely in the time available, and stored what he saw with the efficiency of a man who had done this enough times that the process was no longer conscious. 2 security cameras on the front corners of the building angled to cover the road and the parking lot. A third above the loading dock. A fourth smaller positioned on the back corner in a way that suggested it was covering the side entrance. He kept driving. 2 miles east of the warehouse, he pulled onto a logging trail that cut up into the hillside and killed the engine. He got out. He walked into the trees, up the slope through the pines with their carpet of needles muffling his footsteps, until he reached a point on the ridge where he could look down on the warehouse from above. He pulled the binoculars from his jacket pocket. He settled against a tree trunk and he watched. An hour and 4 minutes. In that time, he counted 7 men. He noted the shift change at 7:32 men coming in through the main entrance, while one left in the Camaro. He noted the way the cameras were positioned and the one blind spot on the northeast corner where the angle between the third and fourth cameras created a gap of approximately 8 feet. He noted the loading dock door opening twice, once to receive a delivery of what appeared to be standard commercial freight, once for no apparent reason, and closing again after about 90 seconds, which suggested something other than standard commercial freight was also moving through that door. He noted that the light in the office above the main floor stayed on the entire time, a steady warm glow through a single window. He put the binoculars away. He started back down the slope. He was about 30 yards from the truck when he saw the man standing next to it. He stopped. He stood still in the trees and looked. The man was lean and gray-haired, somewhere in his late 50s, with the kind of angular face that made a person look older than they were. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket, but the posture was unmistakable. The particular way of standing that came from decades of wearing a uniform and never fully stopped, even when the uniform came off. He had a rifle on a strap over his shoulder, held loose and pointed down, which was the posture of a man who wanted you to know he had a rifle without appearing to threaten you with it. Cole walked the last 30 yards at a normal pace. He stopped about 20 feet away. Help you, the man said, Mr. Reeves. Cole waited. Name Sheriff Dalt Grover, Madison County. He didn't extend a hand. Cole looked at the rifle. You always make social calls with long guns, Sheriff Habit. Grover's voice was flat, not unfriendly, the voice of a man who had learned to keep his register neutral as a professional tool. Mr. Calloway asked me to come have a word. Mr. Calloway sends his own errands when he has to. Cole looked at him. He looked at the rifle. He looked back at Grover's face. He took one step forward. The word Grover said it plainly. Leave, Mr. Reeves. Take your daughter, pack the truck, drive out today. That's the word. And if I don't, then I start writing tickets. Grover paused. And making phone calls. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ground between them, then back up. Sheriff Grover. Yes, sir. How long you been wearing that badge? 22 years. Cole let that sit for a moment. How long has it been since you made a decision that was yours? Grover's face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Some small movement, barely visible, the kind that happens when a question lands somewhere it was not expected to land. He did not answer. Cole walked past him. He opened the truck door and got in. He rolled down the window. Sheriff, you've got till sundown too. Pick a side. He started the engine. He backed out onto the road. In the rearview mirror, Sheriff Dalt Grover was standing beside the logging trail, holding his rifle loose at his side, watching the red Ford until it disappeared around the curve. Grover stood there for a long time. He did not call Wade. He took out his phone once and looked at it and put it back in his jacket pocket. He walked to his own vehicle, a personal truck, not the cruiser, and he sat in it with the engine off for nearly 20 minutes. On the sun visor above the driver's seat, held there by a rubber band, was a photograph of his wife taken on their anniversary 3 years ago. She was laughing at something outside the frame. She was not looking at the camera. She almost never looked at the camera. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put the truck in gear and drove back to town. Cole was back at the cabin before 9. Sadie had eaten a bowl of cereal and was sitting in the patch of sunlight on the living room floor with her colored pencils, working on something that appeared to involve a great many horses in a field. She looked up when he came in. You were gone. I had some things to do. He kissed the top of her head. You eat. I had cereal. She held up the drawing. Do you like it? He looked at it. All those horses. It's a ranch, she pointed. That's the barn. That's the fence. That's you. He looked at the small figure she had drawn near the fence. A tall man with a blue shirt and a black cap. That's a good likeness, Peanut. I know, she said and went back to drawing. Cole went to the kitchen and made another cup of coffee and stood at the window. He was thinking about the warehouse, about the camera blind spot, about the door, about the man in the office above the floor with the light always on. He was thinking about Earl Dunbar's shoulder. At 2 in the afternoon, he heard a knock at the cabin door. I was in the back room when it came, and he moved to the front without hurrying, but also without any of the ordinary casualness of a man answering an expected visitor. He looked through the side window before he touched the door. Standing on the porch was a boy. I was young, 17 at most, with the thin, unfinished look of someone still growing into himself. His hair was wet with sweat despite the cold. He had a hoodie pulled up and his hands jammed in the front pocket, and he was looking at the door with the expression of someone who has decided to do something and has not yet decided whether that decision was a good one. Cole opened the door 6 inches. Help you. The boy startled slightly, even though Cole had made no sudden movement. Mr. Reeves, who's asking? My name's Cody. Cody Marsh, he swallowed. Loretta told me where you live. I'm sorry, sir. I know I shouldn't be here. Cole looked at him. The sweat despite the cold, the hands in the pocket, the way he kept shifting his weight between his feet. Talk from the porch. Cody nodded quickly. Yes, sir. He pulled his hands out of the pocket and held them at his sides. They sent me, Harlan and Spears. They gave me $50 and told me to come up here and see who answers the door. See how many people are inside. Cole's face did not change. And then what Cody swallowed again. And then tonight, 3 in the morning. They're going to come up here with gas cans, sir. Silence, just the wind in the pines. Cole looked at the boy for a long moment. With a little girl in the cabin. Cody looked at his boots. Mr. Reeves, I'm telling you, I'm not going to do it. I came up here to warn you. I swear to God, I don't want any part of this. Why'd you take the 50? Because if I didn't, they'd have known. They'd have sent someone else, and I wouldn't have had the chance to tell you. Cole studied him. The way a man studies something when he is deciding how much weight to give it. Cody. Yes, sir. How old are you? 17. Your mother know where you are? No, sir. She worked for Callaway. The boy's jaw tightened slightly. Feed store. She runs the register. He's had her on $6.50 an hour for 4 years, and every time she asks for a raise, he reminds her about the loan he's holding on the house. Cole looked at him a moment longer. Why are you telling me this? Cody? The boy looked down at his boots again. He was quiet for a few seconds. Because my mom came home crying again last night. And I'm tired, sir. I'm real tired of watching him do that to her. Cole opened the door all the way. Come inside, it's cold. The boy stepped in. Cole shut the door. Sadie appeared from the living room clutching her drawing and looked at Cody with the frank evaluating gaze of an 8-year-old. Who's he? His name's Cody. He's going to sit on the couch. Sadie considered this. Okay. She held up the drawing. Do you want to see my ranch? Cody looked at Cole. Cole nodded slightly. Sure, the boy said. Yeah, I'd like that. Cole went to the kitchen. He made hot chocolate. He brought it out and handed it to Cody and said, sit down. Cody sat. Sadie sat beside him and began explaining the horses with the detailed thoroughness of someone who considered horses a serious subject. Cole stood near the window and looked out at the ridge and the valley below. He thought for a moment. Then he turned back. Cody, the boy looked up. You came up here. That took something. You understand that, I guess. No guessing. It took something. Say it back. Cody glanced at Sadie, then at Cole. It took something. Good. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your mother and tell her you're sleeping at a friend's house tonight. You're going to give me Harlan's phone number. And then you're going to sit right here on this couch with my daughter and that hot chocolate. And you're not going to leave this cabin until I tell you. Are we clear? Yes, sir. And Cody, yes, sir. If you're lying to me, tell me now, before I walk out that door. Because if you're lying, I can still forgive it. But only before I leave this room. The boy's eyes filled. I'm not lying, sir. I swear on my mother. Cole looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he handed him a piece of paper and a pen. Harlan's number. Write it. The boy's hand shook as he wrote. Cole took the paper, looked at it, folded it, put it in his pocket. He crouched down in front of Cody. His voice was quiet. Cody. Yes, sir. You're a brave kid. The boy started to cry. Cole stood up, said nothing about it, and walked to the back bedroom to make the calls that needed to be made. He called Loretta first. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear the diner sounds behind her voice. The clatter of dishes, the low murmur of the lunch crowd. I need to see you this afternoon. Between shifts. Tell Earl, too. She said, I know. I heard. I've been waiting for someone to ask. He told her 4 o'clock. He told her to come alone and tell no one else yet. Then he called Earl directly. Earl answered with the careful quietness of a man in a public space who did not want to be overheard. Cole said, Earl, I need your back room tonight. 8 o'clock. Earl was silent for a moment. Son, can I use it? Another pause. What are you going to do? Talk to people? What kind of people? The kind who've been kneeling behind their own counters for too long. Earl breathed slowly. Then you're going to get yourself killed. Can I use the room, Earl? The sound of the diner in the background. A coffee cup set down. The particular quiet of a man making a decision. Yeah, yeah, you can use it. Thank you. And Earl, tell the ones you trust, nobody else. And I need a list. Every business owner in town. Who owes Callaway? How much? How long? By tonight, by tonight. Earl said, all right. Cole hung up. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands. Then he called Rourke. Rourke answered before the second ring. Cole said, I need the Little Rock field office. FBI. Do you still have Decker's number? Rourke was quiet for just a moment. You cashing in the 2011 favor? Yes. All right. Give me an hour. What do you need them for? Cole told him. He kept it brief. The warehouse, the distribution operation, the network, the names he had and the evidence he was working to confirm. Rourke said, you want them as leverage or as follow-through both? I want 2 agents in position by this evening, 12 miles out off the main road. I want them ready to move on a call. I'll get it done. Cole. Yeah, go in clean. I know. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the living room. Sadie had fallen asleep against Cody's shoulder, her drawing still in her hand. Cody was sitting very still, afraid to move, looking at Cole with the expression of a boy who had wandered into something larger than himself and was not sure whether to be afraid or awed. Cole looked at the two of them. You didn't move, he said quietly. I didn't know what to do. The boy's voice was just above a whisper. You did fine. At 4 o'clock, he met Loretta in the parking lot behind the diner. She had her coat pulled around her and her hands in her pockets, and she looked like a woman who had been carrying something for a long time and had developed the posture to match. He told her what he needed. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She turned it toward him. He looked at the screen. It took him a moment to understand what he was seeing. Then he understood. Photographs, dozens of them, organized by date. Harlan coming through the diner door, Spears leaning over the counter while Earl stood rigid behind it. Wade himself once at a back table, once near the register. Clear images taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had positioned the phone in a way that looked casual but wasn't. He scrolled. The dates went back more than 4 years. He looked at Loretta. She said, I didn't know what I was building. She paused. I just knew somebody had to remember. How many? She said. 47 photographs and 3 videos. Cole looked at the phone. He thought about what that meant. 4 years of a woman standing behind a counter every morning, holding her phone in a way that looked like she was checking the time, quietly building the case that nobody had asked her to build and nobody had known about. For a day she had no reason to believe was actually coming. He said, your son's name was Danny. She didn't answer right away. Then, yes, sir, I'm sorry. She looked at the parking lot. Her jaw was set. She said, that truck, the one that came in November of 22. I saw the plates. I wrote them down. I've got that too, Cole said. Loretta, when this is over, you're going to have to give all of it to federal investigators. You understand that you're going to have to stand up and say what you know and how you know it. She looked at him directly for the first time. Mr. Reeves, I have been standing behind that counter for 3 years waiting for someone to ask. You think I'm afraid of standing up, he said. No, ma'am, I don't think that at all. At 8 o'clock that night, 7 people filed into the back room of the Sunrise Diner. Earl had set up the folding table with the mismatched chairs, the ones he used for the monthly church deacon meetings, and the fluorescent light above buzzed steadily and without apology. The room smelled of coffee and the old wood of the walls, and the particular closeness of a small space with people in it who had not been in a room together like this before, not for this purpose, not with this weight on it. Earl sat nearest the door because it was his diner, and because some habits of ownership run deep even when everything else is uncertain. Loretta stood in the corner with her arms folded. Margot Winslow, who owned the bookstore, and whose husband Walter had not come home from it in November of 2019, sat with her hands around a coffee cup she had not drunk from. Birch Tatum the barber, 80 years old, and built like a man who had decided that deteriorating was something that happened to other people, sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes clear and steady. Leroy Haynes from the hardware store, barrel-chested quiet, a man who communicated primarily through the set of his jaw. Garrett Penn from the gas station, who was 63 and had the look of a man who had been angry about something for a very long time without any outlet for the anger. Ferris Doyle, the pharmacist, who had come in last and had not yet taken his coat off. Cole stood at the head of the table. He looked at each of them in turn. He said, "My name is Cole Reeves. I've been here 4 days. I have a daughter. I came to Cedar Falls because I wanted quiet. That's still what I want." Nobody spoke. He said 2 nights ago a man named Wade Calloway threw a bottle at my head in front of my 8-year-old daughter. Tonight a 17-year-old boy walked up a mountain to warn me that Calloway is sending men with gas cans to my cabin at 3 in the morning. He waited. He said, "I am not a man who runs. I tried it once. It didn't take." Margot made a small sound, not quite a word. Cole said, "I'm going to tell you what I need. But first, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to take it seriously. Anyone who wants to walk out that door right now can do it. No judgment, no consequences from me. I mean that." Nobody moved. He said, "All right, here's what I need. Testimony. Security camera footage from any business where Calloway or his men have appeared in the last 5 years. Financial records showing payments made under duress. Any documentation of any kind that puts Wade Calloway's operation in the light it deserves to be in." He looked at Ferris. Ferris said carefully, "I have video. 4 separate occasions. Harlan coming into the pharmacy after hours, taking controlled substances from the cabinet, passing them in the parking lot. To Calloway directly, to Calloway directly." Cole nodded. Then he looked at Garrett. Garrett said, 9 years of cash withdrawals. My card processor keeps a transaction log. Every payment I made to that son of a gun is in there with a date and an amount." Cole looked at Birch. The old man said 51 notebooks. He paused, letting that number sit. "I kept track of every dollar he ever took out of my till. 51 of them. The oldest one goes back to 1998. I've got dates, amounts, descriptions. I wrote it all down because my daddy taught me that a man keeps his accounts clean, and I figured that included accounts of what was done to him." Cole looked at Margot. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My husband's autopsy report. I never filed it the way I was supposed to because I was told not to. I kept it. It's in a safety deposit box in Little Rock. I can have it here by Monday." Cole said, "Monday's good, Margot." She nodded. He was about to speak again when the door to the back room opened. Everyone turned. Sheriff Dalt Grover stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his uniform. He was wearing jeans and a work shirt, and he had his hat in his hand held at his side, the way a man holds a hat when he has come to a place where he is not sure of his welcome. The room went completely still. Grover looked at Cole. Cole looked at Grover. Grover said, "You told me to pick a side." The room was silent. He stepped inside. He did not sit down immediately. He stood near the door with his hat in his hand and looked at the people at the table. Each of them in turn with an expression on his face that was very hard to name, because it was several things at once. He looked at Margot last. He looked at her for a long time. She said, "You were there the night Walter died." "Yes, ma'am." "You knew who did it." "Yes, ma'am." "Your report said you couldn't identify anyone." He was quiet. "Was that a lie, Sheriff?" His jaw worked. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her directly. "Yes, ma'am." It was. The room was so quiet that the fluorescent light above them sounded loud. Margot looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you for saying so." She put her hands back around her coffee cup. Grover sat down. Cole waited until everyone had settled. Then he said, "Here's how this works. Nobody in this room meets again. You don't talk to anyone about this. What you've collected, you bring to Earl one piece at a time, spaced out over the next 3 days. You do it casually. You do not rush. You do not draw attention. He looked around the table. Tomorrow Wade Calloway is going to make a move. He may make it at my cabin tonight, or he may wait until morning, but he is going to move. When he does, I need all of you exactly where you are, doing exactly what you've always done. You do not stand up for me. You do not speak up for me. You do not come to my aid under any circumstances. Leroy frowned. Mr. Reeves, that's Cole said. Am I clear? Leroy closed his mouth. Cole said, when it's over, you will hear about it. When you do, you will shake your heads. You will say, what a shame. And then you will open your stores and pour your coffee and sell your hardware and live your lives like any other Wednesday morning. That is the job. Are we understood? They nodded one by one. He looked at Grover. Sheriff, stay a minute. The others filed out. Earl went last and pulled the door behind him. Cole sat down across from Grover. The room felt smaller without the others in it. He said, you know what I'm going to ask? Grover said, I think I do. Cole said, say it. Grover looked at his hat in his hands. You want me on that mountain tonight. Witness with a badge. You want the scene to look exactly the way you're going to make it look. And you want my report to say self-defense, and you want it filed by sunrise. Cole said, yes, sir. Grover was quiet. Cole said, I need to ask you something first. Your son. Is he clean? Grover looked up. 3 years, he said. Cole nodded. Then the debt is paid. The rest is just habit. Grover sat with that for a moment. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. Somewhere in the diner beyond the closed door, a coffee cup clinked against the saucer. He looked at Cole. What time? 2:30. Park at the mile marker on the fire road. Walk up through the trees on the east side. I'll find you. Grover put his hat on. He stood up. He said, Chief Reeves, I've been a crooked man a long time. Cole said, yes, sir. Grover looked at him. Tonight I'm going to be a crooked man for a different reason. Cole looked at him evenly. I know it. The sheriff put his hand on the doorknob. One thing. What's that if you get through tonight? Tomorrow you still have to face Wade Calloway himself. And he's not going to send boys with gas cans the next time. Cole said, I know. Grover said, good. He opened the door and walked out. Cole sat alone in the back room of the Sunrise Diner for about 45 seconds. He looked at the folding table and the mismatched chairs and the buzzing light above him. He turned off the light. That was enough. He walked out to the truck. Back at the cabin, Cody was sitting on the couch, exactly where Cole had left him, awake and upright with his arms around his knees. Sadie had fallen asleep against his shoulder again. The boy looked across the room at Cole and whispered, she just kind of fell over on me. I didn't know what to do. Cole said quietly, you didn't do anything wrong. I didn't move. You did fine. He crossed the room and lifted Sadie all of her blanket and rabbit and the dead weight of a sleeping child. She stirred against his chest. Daddy, I've got you, Peanut. Is it morning? Not yet, honey. Go back to sleep. He carried her to her room. He laid her down and pulled the blanket to her chin and set the rabbit in the crook of her arm. He stood looking at her for a moment. Then he leaned down. Sadie, she murmured, I love you. Whatever happens tonight, you are safe, you hear me? She made a small sound that was neither yes nor no, but was somehow more than both. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stood in the hall for a moment with his hand on the frame. He breathed in. He breathed out. Then he went back to the living room. Cody stood up when he came in. Cole said, you know how to drive stick, yes, sir. My uncle taught me. My uncle. Good. He took the truck keys from the hook by the door. You're going to take the Ford down to the Sunrise Diner and park it in the back lot and give the keys to Earl. Then you're going to walk 2 blocks east to the Cedar Falls Motor Inn and check into room 7. Earl's already paid for it. Cody said, Mr. Reeves. Cole looked at him. My daughter is going to stay here with me tonight. He paused. I'd rather she were somewhere else, but if I put her in that motel by herself, she'll wake up scared and she'll think something has happened to me. I need someone she's already met to sit on that bed and watch whatever she wants to watch on that television until she falls back asleep. The boy was very still. Cole said, if anyone except me or Earl or Loretta walks through that motel room door tonight, anyone, you take her out the back window and you run. He let that land. Where do you go? Cody thought for a moment. St. Andrews. Father Geary keeps the side entrance unlocked. Why Father Geary? Because he's the only man in Cedar Falls that Wade Calloway has never tried to own. Cole looked at him. Good answer. I went to the bedroom. He woke Sadie gently the way you wake a child when you want them to stay mostly asleep, and he told her she was going on a little adventure with Cody. She rubbed her eyes and nodded the way children do when they are too tired to argue, and he carried her to the truck wrapped in her blanket and buckled her into the middle seat and put the rabbit in her lap. Sadie. Yeah, Daddy, I'm going to come see you in the morning. Promise cross my heart. She looked at him with half-closed eyes. Where are you going? I have to stay here a little while. Cody's going to take you to a place with a big television, and you can watch whatever you want. Okay, Daddy. He kissed her forehead. He stepped back. He shut the door. Cody had come around to the driver's side. He stood there for a moment. Mr. Reeves. Yeah, I don't have a dad. Cole looked at him. I just wanted to say that. The boy looked at his boots. I don't know why. Cole put a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. He held it there for a moment. Then he stepped back. Cody got behind the wheel. He put the truck in gear. He drove down the mountain road slowly and carefully in the dark, with an 8-year-old girl asleep in the middle seat and her rabbit in her lap. Cole stood in the driveway and watched the taillights disappear around the first curve. Then the mountain was quiet. He stood there for a moment in the cold. The stars were out, the particular density of stars that you only see far from city lights, the kind that remind you the sky is not a ceiling, but a depth. He breathed in the pine air and the cold and the quiet. Then he went inside and locked the door and began to work. He moved the kitchen table. He rolled up the living room rug. He took the kettle off the stove. He moved Sadie's colored pencils and her ranch drawing off the couch and set them carefully on the bookshelf. He did all of this methodically and without haste. At 11:30, he went outside with a small flashlight. He spent an hour and 20 minutes in the dark around the perimeter of the cabin, doing the things a man does when he has 14 years of training and he knows someone is coming up his driveway with bad intentions and a set of gas cans. He did not rush. He did not sweat. He moved the way a carpenter moves through a house he has built with his own hands, knowing exactly where each board is, knowing exactly what will hold weight and what will not. At 1 in the morning, he came back inside. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He dried them on a dish towel. He looked out the window at the dark valley below. He thought about Sadie in room 7 with her rabbit and the television on low. He thought about a barber's 51 notebooks. He thought about a woman who spent 4 years taking photographs because somebody had to remember. He sat down in the living room in the dark and he waited. At 2:28, his phone buzzed. He read the text from Grover 200 yards out. Walking. Cole replied, stay in the trees. East side. He put the phone in his pocket. He sat in the dark in the quiet of the cabin. He thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill. Actually, a skill that took years to develop. The ability to empty the mind, not through effort, but through a kind of disciplined release to let the body be still, and the hands be loose, and the breath be regular, and simply to wait without the waiting costing anything. At 2:59, he heard the first sound on the porch, the soft, specific sound of a boot placed with deliberate care on a wooden board. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them and stood up and walked to the front door and opened it. Gentlemen, Harlan whipped around. He had a gas can in his right hand, in the particular expression of a man whose body has understood something before his brain has caught up with it. Spears was 3 feet behind him, already moving his hand going to his belt with the automatic efficiency of someone who had practiced the motion enough times that it no longer required thought. Cole said, don't. Spears didn't listen. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds and involved a sequence of movements that Cole did not have to think about any more than a pianist thinks about the individual keys. the body simply executing what years of repetition had made inevitable. Spears' hand came up with the pistol. Cole stepped forward and to the left, simultaneously drove the heel of his palm into Spears' wrist at the precise angle that separated the hand from its grip. Grip rotated his own body through the motion, took the pistol, and had it leveled at Harlan's chest before Spears had finished the sound he was making. Spears stumbled sideways into the porch railing. He grabbed it with both hands and held on and made the noise a man makes when pain arrives before understanding. Harlan froze. The gas can was still in his hand. His mouth was open. Cole said, "Put the can down, Harlan." "Okay, okay." Harlan's voice had lost about 20 years. He set the can on the porch boards with extreme care, as though it were made of something fragile. He straightened up and raised both hands. "Okay, I'm going slow." "Hands, I see that." "Yes, sir." They looked at each other in the dark. Cole was aware of the smell of gasoline in the cold air and the sound of Spears behind him breathing hard. He was aware of the wet darkness at the base of the cabin wall where the fuel had already been poured. He was aware of all of it in the flat, comprehensive way of a man who had processed worse situations than this, with more on the line. Harlan said, Hey, we can talk about this." "Okay, Wade just wanted us to send a message." Cole said, "What message, Harlan?" Harlan's jaw worked. "Man, I don't even know. I just do what I'm told." Cole said, "That ever bother you?" Harlan blinked at the question the way people blink at things that come from directions they weren't expecting. Cole said, "Harlan, yeah, where is he right now tonight?" Harlan looked at the porch boards, then back up. "The warehouse. He's always at the warehouse at night. He's got an office up above the floor. He sits up there. Alone, no. He's got men, 4 or 5 on a slow night. Names." Harlan looked at him. Cole waited. Harlan said Clyde and Russ Beaumont on the door. Travis Wicks somewhere on the floor. Virgil's usually in the back office. "Armed, yeah. Yeah, they're armed. How many cameras inside one on the main floor? One in the office. Office door steel, but he leaves it open when he's been drinking. He drinking tonight." Harlan let out a short, unsteady breath. "Probably." "Yeah." Cole looked at him for a moment. Spears groaned behind him. "Harlan, look at me." Harlan looked at him. His eyes were wet. He was a very large man, and he looked very small. Cole said, "I believe you didn't want to be on this porch tonight." Harlan's voice came out rough. "I didn't. I believe you've been doing things you didn't want to do for a long time." Something moved across Harlan's face that had no clean name. His chin dropped slightly. His shoulders, which had been up near his ears since Cole had opened the door, came down a fraction. He said, "I was there." He stopped. Cole waited. "I was there the morning he made Earl kneel." Harlan's voice was very quiet. "I was standing by the door. I just stood there, man. I just let it happen." Cole said nothing. He knew that silence was in this moment the most useful thing he had. Harlan said, "I've been standing by that door for a long time." "Then step away from it." Harlan looked at him. The wetness in his eyes had moved past the point of containment. Cole said, "I don't kill men who still have a way back." "You hear me?" Harlan's jaw worked. He made a sound that was not quite a word. Cole said, "But I need something from you first. One last job and then you're done with all of it. You walk away clean." And then it happened. Harlan Bick, who was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed somewhere north of 290 pounds, and had a jacket with a flaming skull on the back, and had been the person you did not want to see coming toward you in Cedar Falls, Arkansas, for the better part of 15 years, began to cry. Not quietly. The kind of crying a man does when he hasn't done it since he was 9 years old, and the machinery of it has gotten rusty, and the whole thing comes out at once large and ugly and entirely beyond his control. He stood on the porch with his hands at his sides and sobbed. Cole watched him. He did not comment on it. He did not look away. From the tree line, a voice came quiet and measured. "Mr. Reeves," Cole said, "come on up, Sheriff." Sheriff Dalt Grover walked out of the dark at the edge of the tree line and up the slope to the porch. He moved without hurrying. He had his rifle on a strap over his shoulder and a flashlight in his left hand that he kept angled at the ground. He stepped onto the porch and looked at Spears crumpled against the railing, and at Harlan with his hands up and his face wet, and at Cole standing in the doorway with Spears' pistol. He looked at the gas can. He looked at the foundation of the cabin where the fuel had soaked the wood dark. He said, "You did this clean, Chief." "I tried. They're both alive. They're both alive." Grover looked at Harlan. The sheriff's voice was not unkind. It was simply the voice of a man stating a fact. "I've been looking for a reason to do something about this for a long time." Harlan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I know, Sheriff." Grover looked at Cole. "What's the plan?" Cole looked at Harlan. "Harlan drives. We take his truck. He pulls up to the warehouse like any other night, walks me past the Beaumont brothers at the door, takes me up to the office, knocks the way he always knocks. That's it. That's it." And then Cole said, then Harlan stands against the wall and doesn't move. Grover looked at him steadily. "And Wade and I are going to have a conversation." The sheriff was quiet for a moment. "Chief Reeves." "Sheriff, nobody has to die tonight who doesn't want to." Cole looked at him. "I know that. You know that's not entirely true." Cole didn't answer. Grover crouched down next to Spears. He took a set of zip ties from his jacket pocket, which suggested he had come to this mountain with a clearer expectation of events than his neutral expression indicated. He secured Spears' wrists and stood up. He said, "Spears is going to ride in my truck to the county line. I'm going to put him on a Greyhound with $300 of my own money and the understanding that if I see his face in this state again, I will make it my personal and sustained project to complicate his existence in every legal manner available to me." He looked at Cole. "That works." Grover looked at Harlan. "You're going with Chief Reeves." "Yes, Sheriff." "You understand what that means?" "Yes, sir." Harlan. "Yeah. One round from you toward this man, and I will find your mother, and I will sit across from her at her kitchen table, and I will tell her exactly what kind of man her son turned out to be." "Do you understand me?" Harlan said, "Yes, sir," quietly and completely the way a man answers when the threat is not about physical consequence. "Good." Grover dragged Spears upright and walked him down the porch steps toward the tree line where his truck was hidden. Cole watched them go. Then he looked at Harlan. Harlan had stopped crying. He was standing with his hands at his sides and the porch light falling across his face, and he looked like a man who had just put down something very heavy and was not yet sure how to feel about the absence of the weight. He said, "I ain't good at this." Cole said, "At what?" "Being one of the good ones." Cole said, "Nobody is. That's why you practice." "Practice starting tonight." Harlan looked at him. Then he looked at the gas can on the porch boards. Then back at Cole. "One more thing," he said. Cole waited. Spears was supposed to text Wade when the fire was lit. Signal so Wade could sleep easy. Cole was still. He said, "What was the signal text?" "Two words." Harlan paused. "It's done." Cole held out his hand. Harlan reached into his jacket and produced a phone. Cole took it. He unlocked it, no passcode, and found the thread. It was labeled with a single initial. He typed the two words. He hit send. He put the phone in his pocket. He said, "Drive." They walked down the drive to Harlan's truck. Cole got in the passenger side. He did not carry a weapon into the vehicle. Harlan noticed this. He said nothing about it for almost a mile. Then he said, "You're not taking anything in there." Cole said, "No." "Why?" "Because if I bring a weapon in there, it becomes a different kind of conversation." Harlan drove. The road came down off the mountain and flattened out, and they went through the dark, empty intersection at Main and Route 9. The stoplight cycling through its colors for no one, and then east on the county road toward the railroad tracks. Harlan said, "What if he doesn't sign?" Cole looked at the road ahead. "He'll sign." "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to give him the same choice I gave you. And Wade Calloway is many things, but he is not a man without sense." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "Then he's not going to like it." "No, he's not." Another silence. The warehouse lights appeared in the distance ahead. Harlan said, my mom used to work at that diner before Earl bought it. She was the Tuesday-Thursday waitress for about 6 years. I ate pancakes at that counter when I was 8 years old, man. Right next to Earl. I watched Wade make him kneel and I didn't do anything. I just stood by the door. Or, Cole said, you're here now. Harlan said, I know. Cole said, that counts. Does it? Cole looked at the warehouse coming up on the right, its lights burning in the black pickup in the lot. Yeah, Harlan, it counts. Harlan pulled into the lot and parked in his usual spot, which was the second space from the left, which was where Harlan always parked, because routine was important. The Beaumont brothers were at the main door, Clyde leaning against the wall, and Russ standing with his hands in his pockets, and they looked up when Harlan got out. Clyde said, thought you were on the ridge tonight. Harlan said, Wade called me in. Russ looked at Cole coming around from the passenger side. Who's this Wade wants to see him? Clyde and Russ looked at each other. Something passed between them, the particular communication of brothers who have been in the same situations for so long, they have developed a shorthand that requires no words. Then Clyde shrugged and stepped back from the door. They went inside. The main floor of the warehouse was large and high-ceilinged and lit by industrial fixtures that hung on long chains. It smelled of concrete and motor oil, and the specific chemical neutrality of a space that handles large volumes of product and is cleaned regularly. Several men were visible at various distances, moving or stationary, and Cole mapped each one as he crossed the floor behind Harlan without appearing to look at anything in particular. Travis Wick near the south wall. Virgil Pruitt in the glass-walled back office with his head down over something on a desk. One more man Cole did not recognize near the loading dock, just finishing a cigarette. The staircase to the upper office was metal open-sided running up the east wall. Harlan went up first, Cole followed. At the top, a steel door heavy currently ajar. Light coming through the gap. Harlan stopped at the door. He looked at Cole. Cole nodded once. Harlan knocked 3 times. His knock. The one Wade recognized. A voice from inside said Harlan. Where's Spears? Harlan said. Right behind me, boss. Bring him in. I want to hear it from him. Harlan opened the door. He stepped to the side. Cole walked through. The office was not what the outside of the warehouse suggested. It was paneled in dark wood and had a proper desk and a leather chair and a lamp that gave warm light and a laptop open on the desk and a glass of whiskey sweating a ring on the coaster. A cigar burned slow in a cut glass tray. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and the particular controlled comfort of a man who has decided that his personal space will not reflect the nature of the business that funds it. Wade Calloway looked up from the laptop. He looked at Harlan in the doorway. He looked at Cole. For one full second, he did not move. Then his right hand began a slow drift toward the desk drawer. Cole said, Mr. Calloway, please take your hand off that drawer. Wade's hand stopped. He looked at Cole with an expression that was not fear. Fear was not the primary register of a man like Wade Calloway, who had been navigating dangerous situations for 30 years through a combination of intelligence and nerve. What his expression held instead was something closer to recognition. The particular look of a man who realizes that a thing he has been told about is now standing in his office. He said, just Cole. Cole said, yes, sir. Wade leaned back in his chair. He took his hand from the area of the drawer and rested both hands on the desk. He looked at Harlan. Harlan was looking at his own boots. Wade looked back at Cole. He smiled. It was the dinner table smile, the one that had been working for him for a long time in rooms like this one, and rooms considerably less comfortable. He said, son, you've walked into a box. Cole pulled the chair from the opposite side of the desk and sat down. He put his elbows on his knees. He said, Mr. Calloway, I need you to listen to me for a few minutes. Wade picked up the whiskey glass. He held it without drinking. He said, you've got my attention. Though I'll point out that I have men downstairs, and you walked in here without so much as a jacket pocket that sits wrong. Cole said Clyde and Russ are at the front door. Travis is by the south wall. Virgil's in the back office. The man by the loading dock finished his cigarette about 7 minutes ago and went to the break room. Wade set the whiskey glass down. Cole said, "That's every man in this building and where he is. None of them know where I am." The smile remained, but something behind it had shifted. Cole said, "I want to tell you what I've collected, and then I want to show you a piece of paper, and then you're going to make a decision." Wade said, "I'm listening." Cole said, "Birch Tatum, your barber." Wade said nothing. 51 notebooks, Cole said, going back to 1998. Every dollar he ever recorded coming out of his register on your account. Dates, amounts, descriptions. 51 of them in his own handwriting. He's 80 years old, and his handwriting is very clear. Wade was still. Loretta Vance, Cole said, "Your waitress at the Sunrise Diner." Something moved in Wade's eyes. 47 photographs and 3 videos. 4 years of documentation. Clear images. Faces visible. Dates embedded in the metadata, including footage of you personally on 2 occasions that puts you in the diner in a context that is not social. Wade said carefully, "You're bluffing." Ferris Doyle, Cole said, "Your pharmacist." Wade said nothing. Video on 4 separate occasions of Harlan Bick entering the pharmacy after hours and removing controlled substances from the cabinet and conveying them to you in the parking lot. The camera angle is very good. Ferris set it up himself. Wade's jaw had tightened. He was still holding the whiskey glass, but he had not drunk from it. Garrett Penn, gas station on Route 9. 9 years of transaction logs showing cash withdrawals made under duress. He kept the records because he's methodical and because some part of him understood he was going to need them someday. Wade put the glass down. Margot Winslow, Cole said. Bookstore. Wade's eyes went flat. Her husband's autopsy report. She never filed it the way she was told to. It's been in a safety deposit box in Little Rock for 5 years. She can have it here by Monday. Wade said quietly, "Mr. Reeves, what you're describing would take an army of lawyers and months of proceedings to even begin to 2 agents," Cole said. "Hampton Inn on Route 12, 12 miles from here. They've been in position since 10 o'clock this evening. They have copies of everything I just described. They have been watching this warehouse since they arrived." He paused. "They are waiting on a phone call from me." The room was very quiet. The cigar in the tray had burned down to a stub and gone out on its own. Wade looked at Cole for a long time. He looked at him the way a man looks at something when he is trying to find the angle that makes it manageable and cannot find it. He said, "What is it you want?" Cole reached into his jacket slowly and took out a folded envelope. He set it on the desk. He slid it across. "Your signature," he said, "on a confession. A lawyer in Fayetteville typed it up this evening. It covers your involvement in the death of Walter Winslow, the distribution of narcotics in Madison County, between 2016 and the present 7 counts of assault, 2 counts of extortion. You sign it tonight in front of Sheriff Grover, and tomorrow morning you walk into the Madison County Courthouse and you surrender." Wade looked at the envelope. He said, "And if I don't, then I make a phone call and federal agents walk through that door in 9 minutes. They find the narcotics in the east storage room and the unregistered firearms in your desk drawer and the financial ledger on that laptop that I suspect tells a story considerably longer and more detailed than what I just described. And you die in a federal penitentiary, Mr. Calloway. Not a state facility, a federal one." Wade said, "And if I sign state facility in Arkansas?" Cole kept his voice level. "You served 25 years. You come out at 72. Your mother is still alive. The farm on Bluff Road stays in her name. Your sister's children are not pursued. The family keeps what the family has. And the men in your network who operate outside this county, the ones the federal agents don't have specific files on, yet they stay that way." Wade was very still. Cole said, "You're being offered a door, Mr. Calloway. It's a small door, but it's a door." Wade looked at the envelope for a long time. Then he did something that Cole had not anticipated, which was that he opened the desk drawer. Cole's weight shifted forward fractionally, but Wade did not take out a weapon. He reached into the drawer and produced a manila envelope worn at the corners, the kind of envelope that has been opened and closed many times over many years. He set it on the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Then he pushed it across to Cole. Cole opened it. Inside were photographs. Old ones printed on paper rather than phone screens. The colors slightly faded in the way photographs fade when they've been handled many times. He spread them on the desk. Cedar Falls. But a different Cedar Falls than the one Cole had driven into 2 days ago. The sky a dirty gray-green, the light of a late summer storm. Houses with roofs torn off or missing entirely. A church with half its steeple gone. Streets with debris piled along the gutters, insulation and shingles, and pieces of people's lives scattered across the asphalt. And in the photographs moving through all of it, a younger man. Considerably younger without the careful stillness that the current version of Wade Calloway wore like a second skin. This version was in work clothes with dirt on his knees and sawdust on his jacket, moving between damaged houses, with other men around him hauling materials on a roof with a nail gun, at a folding table with paper spread in front of him, and people standing around it looking at him like he was the only person who knew what to do. Cole looked at the photographs. Wade said August of 2009. Category 2 came through and sat on Cedar Falls for 6 hours. The county said it would take 8 weeks to begin assessing damage. FEMA said 12 to 16 weeks for any meaningful assistance. The state said it was monitoring the situation. He was quiet for a moment. He said I was 29 years old. I had some money, not a lot, and I had some connections and some equipment, and I had grown up in this county, and I knew these people. He looked at the photographs, so I showed up. I fixed 31 roofs that summer. I organized the cleanup crews. I personally fronted the cost of materials for 11 families who could not have replaced them otherwise. I did not ask anything in return. Cole said nothing. Wade said nobody else showed up, Mr. Reeves. Not the county, not FEMA, not the state, not the insurance companies, who found very creative reasons why storm damage in Madison County did not meet their specific definitions of storm damage. Nobody came. He paused. Just me. Cole looked at the photographs, at the younger version of this man on the roof of a stranger's house with a nail gun in his hand. He said, "That's not justification, Mr. Calloway." "No," Wade said. "I know it's not." He leaned back. He looked at the ceiling. He said, "You want to know the thing about power, Mr. Reeves, the thing that nobody tells you until you already have it. It moves. It starts as something you pick up because nobody else will, and it is useful, and it solves problems, and people are grateful for it. And then it moves, slowly, so slowly you don't notice it happening. And one day you're standing in a diner at 6 in the morning, holding a man down behind his own counter, and you are not the same person who nailed shingles for free in August of 2009. And you cannot for the life of you clearly identify the moment it changed." The room was very quiet. Even the building seemed to hold still. Cole said, "That's why there's a door, Mr. Calloway." Wade looked at him. Cole said, "Because the man in those photographs is still in there somewhere. And I would rather that man walk through a door than not." Wade was silent for a long time. He said, "My mother is 81 years old. She lives on the farm on Bluff Road. My sister looks after her. The farm stays in her name," Cole said. "The feds don't touch it. Your sister's children are clear." Wade said Harlan. Cole said Harlan is not on any list. He made a different choice tonight. Wade said my people will come after him. Cole said no, they won't, because you're going to tell them not to. Tonight, before you do anything else, you're going to send a message to every person in your network, and you're going to tell them that Cedar Falls is finished, and that anyone who comes looking for payback answers to you. Personally. From a cell. Wade looked at him. He said, "You think my word from a cell means anything." Cole said, "I think your word from anywhere means everything to the people who know you. That's how you built this. That's how it stays intact when it comes apart." Wade looked at the envelope on the desk. He said, "Mr. Reeves, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why not the tactical answer? Not the speech about the town and the people. Why really? What are you doing in this office at 3 in the morning?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He said, "Because my daughter is 8 years old. And in about 4 hours, she's going to wake up in a motel room and ask where her father is. And I want to be the man who walks through that door, not the man who spent the night taking apart a warehouse, not the man who added to the number he already carries. He paused. I've killed enough men for one life, Mr. Calloway. I'd like the last number to stay the last number. Wade looked at him across the desk. He looked at him for a long time. He said, "You're a strange man." Cole said, "Maybe." Wade said, "Hard and soft in the same skin." Cole said, "Most men are." Wade looked at the envelope. He reached across to the cup on his desk and took out a pen. He picked up the envelope and unfolded the papers inside, and he read. He read carefully and without rushing, turning each page with the deliberate attention of a man who has not survived 47 years by signing things he has not read. It took him 7 minutes. When he was done, he set the papers on the desk. He looked at Cole. He said, "There's a line in here about the Winslow matter, about my men being present and the assault being the proximate cause of death." Cole said, "Yes, sir. That's accurate," Wade said quietly. "Yes, sir." Wade picked up the pen. He signed the papers. He set the pen down. He pushed the papers back across the desk. Cole folded them and returned them to the envelope and put the envelope in his jacket. There was a silence that was different from the silences that had preceded it. Something had settled in the room. The way the air settles after a decision has been made that cannot be unmade. Wade said, "I knew, from the moment you walked into the Iron Horse with your daughter." He looked at the desk. "I've been doing this long enough to recognize something I can't read. And I couldn't read you." He almost smiled. "I threw that bottle because I was afraid of you. Not because I thought I could intimidate you. Because I needed to see what you do." Cole said, and you did nothing." Wade said, which was the worst possible answer. Cole said, "Most men like you never see it coming." Wade said, "No, they don't." He looked at the photographs still spread on the desk, the 2009 photographs, the younger man on the roof with the nail gun. "Well," he said it quietly, without bitterness, without self-pity, the word of a man taking stock. He took out his phone. He composed a message that took about 90 seconds. He read it over. He sent it. He put the phone down. He said, "Done." Cole stood. He looked at Harlan, who had been standing against the wall without moving as instructed for the entirety of the conversation. "Harlan, get the sheriff." "Yes, sir." Harlan went to the door and opened it and called down the staircase. Grover's footsteps came up the metal stairs at a measured pace. He appeared in the doorway, took in the room, looked at Wade behind the desk, looked at Cole standing. He said, "Mr. Calloway." Wade said, "Sheriff Grover." Grover said, "You want to come with me?" Wade looked at the cigar stub in the tray. He stood up from the desk. He buttoned the top button of his shirt. He smoothed his jacket. He picked up the dead cigar and moved it to a different spot in the tray carefully, as though it mattered where it rested, as though this small act of order was the last one available to him, and he intended to perform it correctly. He walked around the desk. He walked past Cole. He walked past Harlan. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around. He said, "Sheriff." Grover said, "Yeah." Wade said, 22 years. Grover said, "I know." Wade said, "Is this where you apologize?" Grover said, "No. That part was last month. You just didn't hear it." Wade nodded once. He walked through the door. Grover followed him. Cole stood in the office alone for a moment. He looked at the photographs on the desk. A younger man on a stranger's roof in August of 2009. He left them there. He looked at the lamp and the leather chair and the glass of whiskey that had never been finished. He looked at the laptop, still open, still glowing with the blue light of something that no longer mattered. He turned off the lamp. He walked out. Downstairs, the FBI agents had come in through the loading dock. Clyde and Russ Beaumont were secured near the south wall, both sitting on the floor, with the resigned expressions of men who had understood before the evening was over that the evening was over. Travis Wick was against the wall near the stairs, with his hands behind his head. Virgil Pruitt had come out of the back office on his own and was standing with his hands up, talking to one of the agents in the particular rapid and earnest way of a man calculating how much cooperation might be worth. He would cooperate fully, as it turned out. He would cooperate so thoroughly and so completely that his lawyer would later describe it as the most productive client conversation he had ever witnessed. Virgil Pruitt had spent 9 years making small compromises. He was done making compromises of any size. Wade walked across to the warehouse floor for the last time. He walked between the men and the agents and the equipment and the materials and all the physical evidence of 15 years of his life, and he looked at none of it. He walked to the front door and threw it into the night air. Grover's cruiser was parked by the entrance. Grover opened the rear door. Wade got in. He sat down. He closed his eyes. The door shut. Harlan stood at the top of the warehouse steps. Cole put a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Come on," he said. They walked out into the night. The sky in the east was beginning to change. Not light exactly, not yet, but the particular quality of dark that precedes light, where the black starts to separate from itself and becomes multiple shades of darkness, each a little less absolute than the last. Cole stood in the parking lot and looked at it. Harlan stood beside him. After a moment, Harlan said, "Is it over?" Cole said this part. "What happens now?" "Now I go get my daughter," Harlan said. "Mr. Reeves." Cole looked at him. Harlan said, "For what it's worth, those pancakes at Earl's counter when I was 8, that diner, that's what Cedar Falls was supposed to be." Cole looked at him for a moment. He said, "Go home, Harlan. Sleep. Come back tomorrow and do something different." Harlan looked at the lightening sky. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." I walked to his truck. He got in. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel and the engine off. Then he started it and drove out of the lot and onto Route 9, heading west away from the warehouse toward whatever came next. For a man who had chosen at 3:15 in the morning to step away from a door he had been standing beside for a very long time. Cole pulled out his phone. He called Rourke. Rourke answered on the first ring. "It's done," Cole said. Rourke said, "You okay?" Cole said, "Yeah." Rourke said, "Clean." Cole said, "Clean." There was a pause. Rourke said, "Go get your daughter." Cole put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the sky one more time. Then he got into the FBI agent's loaner vehicle, which smelled of fast food and stale coffee, and he drove west through Cedar Falls, through the intersection with the single stoplight cycling patient, and yellow past the diner, past the barber shop with the pole out front, past the hardware store and the gas station and the feed store. All of it quiet and dark and unchanged on the surface, in the way that towns often are unchanged on the surface, even when something fundamental has shifted beneath them. He parked at the Cedar Falls Motor Inn at 5:40 in the morning. He walked to room 7. He knocked softly. Cody opened the door. His eyes were red from no sleep, and he had the look of someone who had been responsible for something and had taken the responsibility seriously all night long. "He's here," Cody said quietly into the room. Sadie came off the bed like she had been launched. She crossed the room in approximately 1.5 seconds and hit Cole at waist height and grabbed on with both arms and held on the way. She always held on, which was completely without reservation, the way only children and the very brave can manage. He picked her up. She wrapped her legs around him and pressed her face into his neck. "Daddy." "Hey, Peanut. You came. I came. You said you would." "I did." She held on. He held on. He stood in the doorway of room 7 of the Cedar Falls Motor Inn with his daughter in his arms, and the sky going pale gray to the east, and the smell of pine coming in from the mountains, and he held on for a long time. "Are we going home?" she said into his neck. He looked at Cody over the top of her head. Cody was standing by the wall with his hands in his hoodie pocket looking at the floor. Cole said, "Cody." Cody looked up. Cole said, "Thank you." Cody said, "Yes, sir." Cole said, "You hungry?" Cody said, "Yeah, let's go." At 6:58, the bell above the door of the Sunrise Diner jingled. Cole walked in with Sadie on his hip and Cody behind him. Earl was behind the counter with the coffee pot. He looked up. He saw them. He set the coffee pot down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely reliable. He came around the counter. He walked straight to Cole and put both arms around him and held on without saying anything. Cole felt the man's shoulders shake once. Then Earl straightened up. He looked at Sadie. He said, "Miss Sadie, you want a pancake?" "Yes, please," Sadie said. Loretta came out of the kitchen. She saw them. She put a hand over her mouth. She turned around and went back through the kitchen door, and they heard her just once. A sound that was large and broken and completely free. The sound of something that has been held for a very long time, finally being released into the open air. Birch Tatum was at the counter with his coffee. He looked up at Cole. He looked at Sadie. He set his cup down carefully. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He had 51 notebooks that said everything that needed to be said, and this morning they were worth every word of every one of them. He looked at his coffee and nodded slowly to himself, like a man confirming something he had believed for a long time. By 8 o'clock, the diner was full, in a way that it had not been full in some time. The particular fullness that has nothing to do with a breakfast special and everything to do with the way word moves through a small town when something has happened in the night that changes the morning. Margot came in from the bookstore. She sat at the counter and held her coffee with both hands and did not say anything for a long time. She did not need to say anything. She was simply there, and being there was enough. Leroy came in from the hardware store and stood near the door for a moment, looking at the room before he found a seat. The way a man looks at a room he's been locked out of for years and has just been let back into. Garrett Penn from the gas station came in and hugged Earl, which surprised them both. Ferris Doyle, the pharmacist, sat at the counter and did not order anything and simply existed in the room, which was, it seemed, precisely what he needed to do. Nobody made a speech. Nobody raised a glass. There was no moment of formal acknowledgement, no ceremony, no declaration. What there was instead was the sound of cups being set down and chairs being pulled out, and the particular murmur of people who have been afraid together for a long time and are finding out what it feels like to be in the same room without the fear pressing down on everything. Sadie sat in Cole's lap at the booth by the window and drew on a paper placemat with a red crayon. She was drawing a house. She drew her father next to the house, a tall figure with a blue shirt and a black cap, the same figure she always drew. She drew a sun over the house and pressed hard on the crayon, coloring it in, and the crayon snapped cleanly in half. "Oh no," she said. "It's okay, Peanut. I broke it. Loretta will give you another one. She only has one red. Then we'll buy her a new box. Today." She leaned her head against his chest. She looked at the broken crayon and the unfinished drawing. "Daddy. Yeah. Is the bad man gone?" Cole looked up. Across the diner, Earl was pouring coffee for a trucker at the counter. Earl caught Cole's eye. He nodded once, the small, complete nod of a man who has said everything he needs to say. Cole nodded back. He said a lot of people made him go Peanut, including you. She considered this seriously. Me, you. How Cole thought about it. He said because you were in that booth, and you kept your eyes on me, and you held my hand when I needed it held. She colored the roof of the house green with the half that remained of the broken crayon. "Good," she said with the complete satisfaction of a child who has decided the matter is settled and there is nothing more to discuss. 3 days later, Sheriff Dalt Grover walked into the Sunrise Diner at 7 in the morning. He was not wearing his uniform. He was wearing jeans and a work shirt and a ball cap that said Cedar Falls Feed and Supply across the front. He sat down at the counter and Earl came over with the coffee pot. Earl said, "Dalt." Grover said, "Earl, you off duty, off everything. Retired this morning." Earl looked at him for a moment. He said, 22 years. Grover said, "Figured that was enough." Earl poured the coffee without being asked. Grover said, "Thank you." Earl said, "It's nothing." Grover said, "It's something." Earl looked at him. They were quiet for a moment, the quiet of two men who had been in the same town for a long time and had been on opposite sides of something and were now carefully finding out what it meant to be on the same side. Cole came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder. Earl had put him on dishes 3 days ago as a joke that had somehow not resolved itself into Cole leaving, which was Cole suspected the entire point. Grover looked at him. Chief Reeves, Grover said. Cole said, Sheriff. You look different out of uniform. 22 years of habit, Grover said. Takes some getting used to. Cole leaned on the counter beside him. They looked out the window together at Main Street in the morning light. Grover said, my wife wants to know if your daughter would like a playmate sometime. She's got 4 grandchildren and apparently feels she is underutilizing her capacity. Cole said Sadie would like that very much. Tell her yes. Grover nodded. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He looked out the window at Birch's barber shop across the street, where Birch was out front with his broom, doing the thing he had done every morning for 51 years, sweeping the sidewalk in the early light with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who has decided that the ordinary tasks of an ordinary morning are worth doing properly. The feed store was opening. The hardware store was opening. Margot's bookstore was turning its sign from closed to open for the first time in what felt to everyone who noticed it like a very long time. Grover said, what are you going to do now? Chief Reeves Cole thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. He said, finish these dishes, go home, teach my daughter how to plant a tomato, come back tomorrow and eat breakfast and pay my bill and tip Loretta. Do it again the day after that. Grover nodded slowly. He drank his coffee. He said, good plan. Cole said, it's the only plan. Grover said, sometimes that's the best kind. That afternoon, Cole drove them up the mountain. He unloaded a tomato plant from the truck bed in a bag of soil and a wooden stake and a roll of twine. Sadie carried the plastic watering can with both hands, walking ahead of him toward the cabin with great seriousness of purpose. The way she approached things, she had decided were important. They went around to the south side of the cabin where the afternoon sun came through the pines and lay warm and wide and unhurried across a patch of ground that had good drainage and enough light, and had been waiting, it seemed, for exactly this. Cole turned the soil with a shovel. Sadie watched every motion with the complete attention of someone learning something for the first time and intending to remember it. She said, is it scared, Cole? Said, is what scared? The plant, because it's in a new place. Cole set the shovel aside. He crouched down and looked at the plant in its small plastic pot, its roots waiting to find ground. He said, plants know, Sadie. You give them sun and water and time and they know. A plant doesn't ask whether it belongs somewhere before it decides to grow. It just grows. She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. She said, people too. Cole looked at her. He looked at his daughter standing in the afternoon sun in the pines above Cedar Falls with a plastic watering can in both hands, and her rabbit tucked under one arm, and her hair coming loose from its ponytail, and her face entirely open, entirely present, entirely unafraid. He said, yeah, Peanut, people too. He set the plant into the ground and packed the soil carefully around the roots and drove the stake in firm and straight and tied the plant to the stake with a loose figure 8 of twine, the kind that holds without cutting. Sadie watched every step. She asked 2 questions. She remembered the answers. Sadie, Cole said, yeah, that's your job now. Every morning, you water it, you check on it. You don't skip a day, not even when it's cold, not even when it doesn't seem like it needs it. You do it every day because that's the deal. Every single day, every single day. That's the job. She nodded the way she nodded when she had made a decision that was final. She tipped the watering can over the base of the plant, and a thin ring of water darkened the soil in a perfect circle. More, he said. She tipped it further. There you go. She watered it until the can was empty. Then she set the can down and stood back and looked at the plant in its new ground with the stake beside it and the afternoon sun on it and the mountains all around. Below the ridge, Cedar Falls sat in the afternoon light, doing the things that towns do in the afternoon, which is to say, it was alive in the ordinary way that living things are alive without drama and without ceremony, just the persistent and sufficient fact of its own continuation. The church steeple, the single stoplight blinking yellow at the intersection of Main and Route 9. The rooftops and the diner and the bookstore and the barber shop and the hardware store and the gas station and the feed store, all of it small and particular in exactly what it was. Cole saw Earl through the diner window, a small figure moving behind the glass, refilling a coffee cup for someone at the counter. He saw Margot's bookstore with its door propped open, which was new, which had not happened in a long time. He saw Birch's barber pole turning in the afternoon light. He saw Cody Marsh walking down the sidewalk toward the feed store with 2 cups of coffee in a paper tray, one for him and one for his mother. And the way he walked was different from the way he had walked up a mountain 4 days ago in the cold with $50 in his pocket that he hadn't wanted to take. He walked like someone who had done something and knew it. I saw a town that was for the first time in a long time simply itself. Sadie took his hand. Daddy. Yeah, Peanut. She looked up at him with that direct, uncomplicated gaze that children have before the world teaches them to look sideways at things. Is this home? Cole looked at her. He took off his cap. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked at the valley below and the sky above, and the pines all around, and the tomato plant in the ground with its stake and its loose figure eight of twine. He put his cap back on. He crouched down beside her. He put one hand on her small shoulder. He held her gaze the way a man holds something he has been afraid to hold for a very long time, afraid that holding it meant it could be taken away, and discovering in this moment that the fear and the holding were not opposites, that you could be afraid and hold on at the same time, that this was in fact the only honest way to do it. Yeah, Peanut, this is home. She hugged him. He held on. And on a ridge above Cedar Falls, on a clear afternoon in early autumn, a man who had spent 14 years in the service of his country, and 3 years in the service of his grief, and one long and necessary night in the service of strangers who had needed someone to stand up, set down the last of what he had been carrying. Not because the weight was gone, not because the past had been rearranged into something easier, but because he had found the place where the weight could be put down and the ground beneath it would hold. The tomato plant stood in its new ground. The sun was warm on his back and on his daughter's hair. Sadie hummed something tuneless and entirely her own beside him, the way a child hums when she is 8 years old, and she is in a good place and she knows it, and the knowing is for now and for a long time to come enough.